Welcome back to Taiwan versus the world. Today we will take a deeper look at the concept of middle powers. Is Taiwan a middle power? And how can it work with other middle powers? We will also look at its relationship with Croatia, or rather lack thereof, as an example of how Taiwan can engage with other countries. Then we will hear the testimony of a Chinese national who left her country to advocate for human rights. But first, let's talk to our two guests. Today we will talk about Taiwan's place in the world with a different angle. We are going to talk about how Taiwan can be a middle power. We're going to compare it with the situation of some countries in Europe, see what we can learn, see how it works, see if it is working. And to discuss these topics with me today are Andrew Yeh and Lana Pedisic. Andrew and Lana, hello.
Hello, hello.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having us.
I would kindly ask you first to introduce yourself. Maybe Lana, you want to start?
Yes, sure. My name is Lana Pedisic, and I'm a visiting research fellow at the Institute of National Defense and Security Research here in Taipei. And my research is focused on how Croatia, my country, and Taiwan can develop closer bilateral relations, particularly within the defense, academia, and people-to-people connections. Because Croatia is actually one of the few EU and a NATO country that pretty has no relations with Taiwan, but it is working on it. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
And
Excellent.
I'm Andrew Yeh. I'm the Executive Director of the China Strategic Risk Institute. We are a global think tank headquartered in London, investigating security, economic, and tech risks in relation to China. And I lead our work on Taiwan, cross-strait relations, and grey zone warfare. So always great to be back in Taiwan and learning from the many experts here.
Thank you so much. So it seems like you are both working on evolving processes and trying to learn also from Taiwan. Lana, you just said something that makes me very curious. You said Croatia and Taiwan have
Yes.
no relationship. This is especially interesting because it means that you are observing in real time a, a relationship building up and getting off the ground. So can you tell us a bit about what is going on? What is the situation right now between Taiwan and Croatia? Let's take it as an example.
So Croatia in 2008 subscribed to the One China principle. Now, it could have been pressured by the PRC at the time, and I don't believe Croatia really knew what they were. Croatian government didn't really know what they were agreeing to, as our politicians time and time again confuse the One China principle and the One China policy. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs, he said that Croatia adheres to the European Union's version of the One China policy. However, officially, we have signed the One China principle. And our government since 2000, well, for several years, has practiced a zero sum policy, meaning that we cooperate politically. We prioritize relations with Beijing over Taipei, and we completely ignore Taipei in every other way. However, when it comes to private cooperation, business is happening. And as of new, so this is a new thing that's happening, is drone cooperation, private to private. Freighter companies are selling to Taiwan, and Taiwania, an investment capital firm, has invested in the Croatian drone company. So there is a little bit of improvement, but there's a lot to develop. There's also some academic cooperation. However, it's not nearly as developed as other Central European countries such as Poland or Czechia or Slovakia.
Well, I'm sorry if that sounds a bit harsh, but it seems like Croatia is reaping benefits from Taiwan without giving anything in return if they are getting the investments and yet adopting a foreign policy position that is dangerous for Taiwan, isn't it?
Yes, yes. However, it is a private company, and they are trying to position themselves as a red free supply chain in the so no Chinese components. It is the beginning of their cooperation, and I mean the government is not involved in here, so that's why I'm saying that private to private is the way to begin the relations, and then the government might hop on the train as time progresses and positions shift. However, our government is very afraid at the moment to conduct any type of relations with Taiwan, as it has been approached in the past. We've been warned not to attend, for example, Lai Ching-te's inauguration, even though nobody was going to attend anyway, but we were still warned. Our government doesn't have the courage at the moment to engage in para-diplomacy like other EU countries.
All right, thank you. That's very interesting to see the private sector filling in the diplomatic role and trying to initiate a change. Andrew, now back at you. We said we would discuss also what it means to be a middle power. We are kind of touching on this because we see here countries interacting in a different way from what we are used. So, Andrew, just to kickstart the conversation, how would you define what is a middle power?
Thanks, Julian. Yeah, well, I suppose what we've seen over uh, the last year is really the ability of superpowers to set policy which reshape global dynamics. I mean, we've seen that with the US in particular, and kind of the trade tariffs that it's imposed on different countries around the world, which has kind of reshaped global supply chains overnight. We've seen China's ability to hit back, forcing a major change in US and European policy by implementing export controls on critical raw materials. And then, of course, recently, the Iran war and the shocks that has sent to global oil prices, and kind of impacted manufacturing supply chains through those actions. So clearly, on the level of superpowers, kind of the US and China are above and beyond what other countries can hope to achieve in terms of their ability to leverage economic or political actions to affect global change. I think what defines a middle power, though, as opposed to kind of countries with less agency or less power, is the ability to still have a key global role, and to still have maybe one aspect, one kind of USP, as it were, which the world does rely on them for, which does allow them to exert leverage, and which does enable them to project power and influence. I think Taiwan is a very good example of this, with its role in the semiconductor supply chain, and how much the rest of the world relies on this. Taiwan can't, like China, kind of hope to manufacture, pretty much everything at every stage of the supply chain, but it can kind of hold on to this one critical area, and then use that to exert leverage and exert influence. So yeah, I do think Taiwan is a kind of prime example of both the opportunities and challenges that middle powers have before them.
So, Andrew, if we try to make a link with what Lana was talking about and describing Taiwan trying to reach out to another country through this kind of channel, do you think that this is an example of middle power behavior coming from Taiwan?
Well, I think there's two things to say here. Um, I think there's one aspect here, which is that Taiwan can be more confident about the way that it approaches other middle powers, recognizing the strategic value that Taiwan brings, and its ability to use whether it's investment or whether it's access to chips, to exert influence in Europe. And I think we're seeing some of this confidence come through a little bit more. I mean, for example, the recent actions taken by Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs to try and persuade South Korea and Denmark to change the way in which Taiwan is listed on various forms and kind of official documents. So I think that there is a growing awareness of the ability of Taiwan to kind of to exert its power and not just be a kind of passive actor. But I do also think that this also shows a failure of Taiwan's foreign policy, which is that there isn't a lot of recognition in Europe, and I'm sure Lana can speak to this in greater detail with regards to Croatia and elsewhere. But I mean, certainly in the UK context, which I'm more familiar with, there isn't a huge amount of awareness of both Taiwan in terms of its geopolitical position, the challenges that it faces, the pressure it's under, but also in terms of Taiwan as an economic power, as a democratic society, as a distinct and unique cultural identity. Taiwan is lacking in these areas, and I think this doesn't help then when Taiwan is trying to build closer relations with countries like Croatia, with countries like the UK. It is hampered by just this lack of understanding of what Taiwan is.
Lana, would you like to comment further on what Andrew said? Did you observe maybe that Taiwan is lacking somehow in its outreach to Croatia, for example, or to other countries?
Yes, I think he definitely proves a point, especially. Yes, Taiwan has neglected Croatia, and they have prioritized perhaps Czechia, Poland, the Baltic states, other Central European countries. However, I do think this is changing, and Taiwan is realizing that members of the European Union are Taiwan's natural partners, and therefore getting the more of them, the better. And I think, especially right now, Croatia is found in a very particular situation. Unlike other countries in Europe, Croatia's security threat isn't Russia, well, not at least an immediate one, but Serbia. And as of recent, we have discovered that last year, Serbia purchased hypersonic missiles from China. Well, and they've been delivering them over the past year. So this is why I'm also focusing more on defense cooperation between Croatia and Taiwan, because this could be an opportunity for the Croatian government to realize that the investment from China is not that it's our focus on having closer relations with China should not be as prioritized, and we could use this to expand our relations with Taiwan, especially when it comes to drone cooperation, in which we're working at the moment.
Are you observing an outreach? Do you see Zagreb really reaching out to Taiwan on this topic? What exactly has been done?
Nothing has been done. I'm just saying it's very new what we discovered, and it could be used as an opportunity. And I mean, as me doing the Croatia-Taiwan relations, I will be the one who's reaching out to our government officials. And I've had some interest through social media from our certain ministers from different government agencies. I will not disclose more, but we have to start somewhere. So this could be one of the areas where we could begin our cooperation, particularly because Taiwan, Europe engages with Taiwan politically and economically, especially economically. But what Taiwan really needs is defense cooperation. And perhaps this, I mean, I realize the risk that comes with openly cooperating within the defense sector. However, if it's private to private or the soft defense, soft security cooperation, like FIMI, as Europe is already doing, but also private to private with drones, for example.
All right, thank you. Back at you, Andrew. We are discussing here the relationship with Taiwan and some European countries as a middle power. Um, how does that take place in the context of this binary view in the world between the US and China? Uh, what do you think is the agency of Taiwan in reaching out beyond the US to other partners?
Well, we've talked a bit about how Taiwan is doing well as a middle power in terms of its ability to leverage its advantages in the chip supply chain. I think where Taiwan faces a huge challenge is that perhaps out of all countries globally, it is the one of the worst placed in terms of trying to achieve a balance between the US and China. I mean, for other countries, I mean, if you look at Vietnam, for example, or Singapore, they can hope to find some kind of a middle way, hope to kind of benefit both from good relations with China and with good relations with the US. Taiwan will never have that luxury. I mean, uh, if we look at the example of Hong Kong, for example, Hong Kong, after it was returned to China after the British colonial period, had this period where it hoped that its autonomy and its kind of democratic system or proto-democratic system would remain in place, and it wasn't. It didn't. It was quickly crushed, as we all know in previous years. So that's really a warning, I think, to Taiwan about the dangers of complacency, about how much kind of Taiwan can engage with China and kind of um, foster economic and political integration with China while also preserving its democracy and its way of life. So yes, Taiwan might be able to preserve some level of dialogue with China, but I think kind of any level of economic and political integration will only end the same way as Hong Kong. So Taiwan does have this challenge where it's uniquely dependent on the US for particularly in defense and weapons. And as we've seen with the Trump presidency in particular, the US as an increasingly erratic, unpredictable, and unreliable actor, dependency on the US is a vulnerable place to be. So I think what I'm getting around to is that uh, yes, it is true that Taiwan can never depend on China, but that doesn't mean that it should only look to the US. It has to build a broader set of relationships, whether those are economic, political, or defense relationships with countries other than just the US. So Europe is one area where that can be fostered. But also with Southeast Asia, with other East Asian countries. We saw that already through the new southbound policy under President Tsai. I think that's really key for Taiwan. So just because Taiwan uh, can't balance between the US and China doesn't mean that it should only rely on the US.
Yes, and this is especially true since the United States greatly isolates itself now and alienate a lot of its allies or partners, which means that Taiwan has to reach out to them in its own terms. But is it succeeding though? Because I do a lot of reporting and interviews on this, and I am sometimes under the impression that Taiwan completely misunderstands Europe and treats Europe as some sort of, I mean, it seems to think that Europeans are Americans, which they are not. Uh, so, what is your take on that? Do you think Taiwan is doing the right thing when it reaches out to Europe, or is it mismanaging that?
So I think there's a number of areas worth discussing here. I mean, I think the first is um, around Taiwan's defense cooperation with Europe. I think one of the issues is that European countries are understandably very cautious and very hesitant about any kind of public form of defense cooperation with Taiwan. But I think there are two areas where there can still be lots of progress. I mean, um, the first is around dual use technologies and the fact that whether we're talking about drones or other dual use technologies, these are increasingly important, particularly for asymmetric defense. So being able to work with Europe in these areas, even under the kind of umbrella of civilian initiatives can help both Taiwan and Europe develop defensive capabilities. And the second is around resilience to hybrid threats. I mean, both the most pressing challenge that both Europe and Taiwan face is around issues such as sabotage of undersea cables, cyber attacks, information manipulation campaigns, use of drones. Um, these are not conventional threats. And of course, Taiwan and Europe have to prepare for the conventional threats as well. That has to be a priority. But insofar as it comes to preparing for resilience to gray zone coercion, Taiwan and Europe can work together, again, without crossing some of those more sensitive defense issues that Europeans are generally a bit more cautious to work with Taiwan on. So I think that's the defense side. The economic side is challenging, and I think this is. I think if you look at the UK and Taiwan, its economic relationship has developed much further. There's been the enhanced trade partnership, for example, between the UK and Taiwan. I think between the EU and Taiwan, on the level of trade agreements or investment agreements, it will always be challenging just because of the level of consensus needed between member states before those kind of agreements can come in place. So I think working bilaterally, as Lana has already highlighted, finding strategic investments, finding strategic business partnerships between Taiwan and European countries has to be key to that. I think going back to your point, Julian, I think often on the Taiwanese side there is a tendency to see Europe as a monolith. Often EU is used as a kind of shorthand for Europe. And I think that, I mean, firstly, that's problematic in terms of not recognizing the broader European community, which is not just the EU. And I think secondly, it's an issue because it often focuses on the EU institutions, which are important, but arguably when it comes to defense issues and foreign policy issues, much more limited than what member state institutions can achieve and the competencies that they have. So I think that's also a kind of misunderstanding or mistake that the Taiwanese side make when engaging with Europe.
Anna, would you like to comment on what Andrew just said?
Yes. So yes, Taiwan does make mistakes when it comes to engaging Europe, and I do agree with his points. However, I would like to also point out that EU, well, if as a whole institution, sure, but also member states. The problem is we don't have a consensus in the EU, and every country practices their own policy towards China, towards the way they treat or prioritize Chinese investment, or but also how they cooperate with Taiwan. There's a lot of misunderstanding on the fear that of retaliation. I think what the EU perhaps could do from an institutional level is to get all the countries to come up to every single country in the EU and kind of try to form some kind of consensus or understanding that Taiwan is different from China and that the EU does encourage engagement with Taiwan. Because every single, I mean, my government, I don't think, as I said, they keep mixing the one China principle, one China policy, but they shouldn't, because the European foreign policy is that the EU adheres to the one China policy. So we are actually going against our position. I mean, yeah, it takes two. It takes two for the relationship to work. I do agree with Andrew's points that Taiwan does treat the EU as a monolith, which is problematic. However, I have seen over the years Taiwan prioritizing the Central European and Eastern countries, particularly with Czechia, Poland. They're very active when it comes to para-diplomacy. Even recently, I think Poland has maybe 13 sister cities with Taiwan. I mean, Taiwan's diplomacy is improving when it comes to the EU, especially it's targeting, it's differentiating between Central and East and the Western Europe.
All right, thank you. Now, circling back to the concept of middle power, I would like to ask, in general, did you observe an example of a middle power somewhere in the world that Taiwan can use for inspiration? It doesn't even need to be in Europe. Anywhere in the world, what do you think is the archetype of the successful middle power, or maybe several of them?
Sure. I mean, I think two examples come to mind, both with kind of different lessons to learn. I mean, I think in terms of middle powers that have rapidly built up defense capabilities in the face of growing threats, I think probably Poland is a good example for Taiwan to learn from. I mean, there's been a real kind of effort to not just procure weapons, but also to build up supply chains within Poland and to build up kind of their own industry. So I think, with all the kind of current debates ongoing in Taiwan about their own defense industry and their own defense budgets, I think Poland is a good example. I think in terms of soft power, probably South Korea. I mean, we've seen the explosion of everything from K-pop to Korean fried chicken across Europe and elsewhere internationally. South Korea, like Taiwan, is a very small country, is very kind of far away from Europe, from the West, but through these avenues has been able to gain a lot of recognition. So I think, for Taiwan as well, being able to exploit its cultural assets, which I do think there are lots of. I mean, anyone I know who's come to Taiwan and spent time in Taiwan kind of goes away loving the place. So I do think there's lots of cultural assets that Taiwan can exploit, and probably, modeling South Korea in that aspect would be beneficial.
Thank you, Lana. What would be your example of a successful middle power?
I actually do agree with the Poland. That was on top of my list as well. I mean, Poland had a communist past, and they have reformed, and they're doing really well economically. They have a security kind of an analogous situation like Taiwan with Russia. They're cooperating. The thing is with Taiwan. So yeah, I would definitely say Poland. I'm not really sure which other country I would say. Maybe Czechia, but Czechia is in the middle. But the problem with Taiwan, it's really hard to put it. It's hard to kind of give an example of a different country because Taiwan is in a very unique position in which that it's not recognized by most countries in the world. It is not present in international organizations. It is extremely difficult for Taiwan to be compared to another country as, I mean, yes, South Korea is, has its own sovereignty. It's a fully, it doesn't have that issue, right? It doesn't have that constant security. It doesn't have the issue of the statehood, right? So it is difficult to compare, but I think Poland would be the best example of how they reformed throughout history, how well they're doing now, their security challenges, economic partnership. But as Andrew said, Taiwan does have that the soft power, the bubble tea. Taiwan is really special. It's a unique country, with blended cultures from its past when it was a Japanese colony, and then it was part of very different. Has a very rich history and a unique culture to export and for in that regard. But when it comes to statehood, that's its biggest issue that will continue to be a problem.
But then again, having exploring this topic for quite a while, I have often observed and collected some testimonies also from people I interviewed that Taiwan shows little interest actually in developing its soft power. Just a couple of weeks ago, somebody I interviewed in this very program said that they've been recommending Taiwanese diplomats and more foreign authorities to adopt the kind of policies that Korean has used, and they were laughed at by Taiwanese authorities. So don't you think there is still a certain misunderstanding among the Taiwanese state apparatus of the possibilities they could use and of the cards they can play?
Yes, they could definitely, yes, and it is the lack of confidence. Perhaps that's one of those. It's a lack of confidence, but there's also lack of support. Taiwan needs to have more global support. Like, yes, it gets from the U.S. I would say, the U.S. it is what it is, the way it is at the moment, but the U.S. is Taiwan's biggest supporter, and they help Taiwan the most. I mean, Europe, in words, rhetorically, does vouch and support Taiwan, but there needs to be more pragmatic and more pragmatic cooperation for Taiwan to have more confidence in the world. And but yeah, I mean, there's creative ways you can diplomatically engage and get yourself out there.
Andrew, did you observe this as well?
I think the challenge is that because Taiwan has been denied formal diplomatic relation for so long, the foreign ministry is always focused on kind of achieving markers which kind of signal kind of pseudo diplomatic status or kind of increasing recognition. And we see that particularly with the kind of the emphasis on kind of photo ops and kind of, changing the name from Taipei to Taiwan or whatever it is. There's always this kind of this desire to be increasingly recognized as a kind of diplomatic partner. And I understand that and I see it, but I think there's also a pragmatism here, which is that European countries are never going to afford Taiwan formal diplomatic status so long as China's position on the one China policy is so strong and so long as kind of the Chinese leadership is the way that it is and wanting to exert pressure on Europe. China can always leverage more economic coercion than Taiwan can. And so I think finding those alternative avenues for engagement that don't rely on formal diplomatic recognition. I mean, there's still so much Taiwan can get done in the commercial space, kind of through in the defense space, as we discussed, and through kind of cultural exchange that is well within the framework of how European countries currently engage with Taiwan and with China and kind of their long-standing policies on China and Taiwan. So I think I'm focusing on getting meaningful things done within the frameworks that European countries have for their relationships with Taiwan. I think that's the priority, and kind of efforts which make Taiwan seem a bit more like a diplomatic partner, even when it's not diplomatically recognized. For me, those take lower priority.
And I think you said something that is really key here in the conversation is to be realistic that no European country, actually pretty much no country in the world is going to grant formal diplomatic recognition to Taiwan because we know that this is pretty much unachievable in the present context. I mean, we could go into details about how China is pretty much ensuring this is not going to happen, and the United States also refuses to caution Taiwanese independence. So that's the whole point of being a middle power, isn't it? It's to find other solutions. Since recognition is not achievable, then let's see what else we can do. Am I right?
Yes, Taiwan. What I think Taiwan should be doing is the constant engagement, whether that be in cultural aspects, academic exchanges with like-minded partners in Europe and abroad. Just constant interaction. Diplomatic visits, yes, sure, the photo ops are a bit silly or a little bit they just kind of appear, but they don't really do anything. However, combining all these factors and seeing what works kind of keeps the Taiwan momentum going. And that's what Taiwan needs. They need to utilize all their assets and keep getting involved as much as they can within every sector. people to people, academia especially, so other countries know, so when it comes to semiconductor production, I know Taiwan is doing a lot of academic exchanges within the tech and the semiconductor stuff. So just the constant engagement, that's what I would say. Making sure that the momentum of Taiwan is maintained.
Andrew, do you want to offer a final comment on this?
Yeah, I think just the point that Taiwan does have a unique relationship with the US. The US has I mean, ensured kind of Taiwan's survival over the last few decades by being able to ensure Taiwan has that deterrence and has that military capability, and kind of preserving that relationship with the US will always be a priority for Taiwanese lawmakers. But I think, diversifying that outlook, looking to build exchanges with Europe, with other countries around the world, has to be part of Taiwan's diplomatic playbook as well. I'm looking forward to seeing what we can develop in this space, particularly with think tank exchange. I'm seeing a lot developed in this area already with Taiwan. So I'm optimistic and looking forward to what we can do in this space going forward.
Andrew, Yeh, Lana Pedisic, thank you so much for being with us today and discussing these topics.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Yaqiu Wang is a researcher and human rights advocate. During our conversation, it became clear that her personal story was powerful in itself and needed to be heard. So we gave her the floor. Here is how she left China to work on human rights internationally.
My name is Yaqiu Wang. I'm right now a fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. I work on human rights and democracy issues concerning China.
And how did you ended up in the United States working on this topic?
Well, it's not out of my own choice. So I grew up in China. I went through the education system from elementary school until college. So, human rights, if you grew up in China, of course, human rights is, a big issue concerning your life. So I didn't like the school system because it was very, ideological and I encountered internet censorship. So I didn't like that kind of control. So I was interested just by growing up being Chinese person. Then I came to to US for school, graduate school, and I was planning to go back to China after, get an education in US. At that time, going to the West to learn from America, from Western countries was a fad. So, but then, when I was ready to go back to China, around that time, Xi Jinping came to power, and the government knew I was doing some kind of activism. I was speaking up on Twitter at the time, in the U.S. Then I went back to China, and then I got in trouble with the government. So in a way that I knew at the time it was not safe to work on human rights issues if I am wanted to continue to live in China. So it's not my choice, and I still wanted to do human rights work, and I don't want to go to jail. So I end up doing human rights work in China from the US.
And then the first question that comes to my mind is to ask you, are you facing any sort of danger in the US or outside of China in general? Because we hear a lot about transnational repression coming from China towards people doing your kind of work.
Yes, I am. Personally, I get emails that feels very suspicious, that mentions my personal detail, that I feel was fishing for my information, fishing to engage with me further. I mean, it could be from the government, it could from some other sources. I have no idea. Then often, I get those warning from, let's say, Google, Gmail, saying, your email account is is under attack by a government-backed sources, things like that, cyber attacks. So those I experience on a regular basis. Then, oftentimes, I have never encountered, I have never been in a situation I feel someone is, actively following me, physically surveilling me. I don't feel on that in that kind of intimate way. But then I hear from people in China that that they that that the government tell them something about me that I only that I think that could only be the information about me or what I do in the United States could only be gotten because they were closely watching me in the US. Do you know what I mean? So I don't actually feel that way in the United States, but they must be doing something. Otherwise, they wouldn't, my family and friends wouldn't know that about me. So that's how I feel. That's how I get the information. But I would say, when I go to an event, when I speak at a public events and I see people, you know, uh, using their phone, videotaping my entire, talk, like what's the point? It's public anyway on YouTube. You can just watch it. But, you know, uh, a lot of other activists say they experience the same. They feel they're being videotaped. So, who are taping us when we're in public setting? So, what's the point of doing that?
I see, I see. Yes, that sounds quite, yeah, quite scary indeed. And do you feel alone sometimes, or are there other people from China doing that same job or that same kind of activities?
Well, I mean, I know that I'm sure that I'm a tiny minority within the Chinese population. By Chinese population, I mean, people from China who grew up in China. I am a tiny minority who work on human rights issues. But do I feel alone? I don't feel that way in the sense that, first of all, I know that what I'm doing is right. That just comes from my really conviction in, everybody wants to live in freedom, wants to have a say in how they're governed, wants to have dignity. So that comes from conviction. So whether other people are working on this issue, it doesn't matter to me. But honestly, people often come to me, like let's say in the US, you have a job working in a tech company, you grew up in China, uh, you got a PhD, so now, in the US now you are a middle class person, right? They come to me saying, I follow you on social media, or I know your work, I appreciate it. So those are information to me saying that there are people who are appreciating um, my work, but they are, I don't actually necessarily know they're doing that because if they go on Twitter retweet what I say, and they can be in trouble. So I think that those are data points that I feel that there are people from the mainland who uh, appreciate what I do, and I feel validated for that kind of uh, nice words to me. The third one is that oftentimes I get messages privately from people in China, tell me like a story of how they're harmed by the government's policies or actions. And you know, it's it's hard to say. Sometimes are they phishing? Are those phishing emails, phishing messages, or are real grievances? I can't really tell. But often feel the when let's say when a father who writes to me talking about how his daughter died in a situation that the government is at fault. Uh, it's such a genuine message with so much emotion. I just feel like it can't be fake. So in a way, I know even people in China are watching and reading what I am doing, appreciate it. So those are information that I feel kind of motivate me to keep doing the work.
And of all the things you have done, which is the one that you are the most proud of or the most satisfied of?
Well, I think it's the connection with the people. first of all, it's the people who are doing the same kind of work, right? I mean, I'm more on the surface than a lot of other people who are working on human rights issues in China. Uh, but there are the people who are, I don't want to get into details because if I don't want it to expose the kind of work they do. But we have a community, so we share the same conviction, and it's just the connections are built along the way with people who are doing the same work is incredibly rewarding. Then the other is, the random person who's accountant for a big accounting firm in the US came to me saying, I know what you do. I'm just like, oh, how is that possible that you know what I do? So those are, um, things that are so fundamental to me. It's the connections. But on the other hand, let's say, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act by the U.S. government was passed, which, basically bans any kind of products from Xinjiang to be imported to the United States. That's a big legislation that affects so many businesses. So that's a concrete win for our community. Also, I only played a minor, a small role in this effort to push for the passing of such a bigger legislation. Those concrete wins are also important to me and to our community.
Thank you very much. Are you comfortable discussing Taiwan? And do you have anything to say about Taiwan?
Well, I've been to Taiwan for a few years. I've been to Taiwan for a few times, and I really enjoy the culture. I can speak my own language. Even accents are different. So I enjoy that setting that combines Chinese culture and freedom and democracy. And I just feel there's such a difference when I talk to people from China and from Taiwan. Uh, like people in Taiwan have enjoyed freedom, for young people their entire life, right? So they don't have this censorship that it is so this internalized censorship. So they talk like sort of like Americans. They say whatever they want to say, and um, when I talk to my journalist friends who foreign journalists who used to be stationed in China, then they moved to Taiwan. They feel the difference is so huge. When you interview a person, this person in Taiwan just talks and talks. In mainland, and like you try to interview 10 people, every person says, "Sorry, I cannot talk about this." So I like the freedom, I like the democracy, I like the culture, and it's a wonderful place to be. And I wanted to tell Taiwanese people that please defend your democracy and freedom. Don't fight for it, or don't get into a place that it's too late to fight for it.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
As a person from mainland China, even when I'm in Taiwan, I'm consciously aware, just by having accent, people are very aware that I'm from the mainland. Sometimes I do feel there's a tension between mainland people in Taiwan and Taiwan people, and I hope Taiwan people don't ultimately assume that people from mainland, share the Chinese government's views. A lot of people don't, and even people who say they are all for unification, comes from a place of heavy propaganda, internalized propaganda and censorship. So, have more understanding of where people come from. So that's my second advice for people in Taiwan.
Thank you very much. This is, very, very rare and precious. We will meet again next week for a new episode of Taiwan versus the World.